Good evening, everyone. How are you? I really can't hear you. My name is Donna Ayin Davis, and I'm the director for the Center for the Study of Women and Society here at the Graduate Center. Okay. I'm also a former CLAGS board member, and I'm delighted to greet you this evening. But first, I'm going to ask that we acknowledge that the Graduate Center sits on the land of the Lenape, and that this land was built up with the labor of enslaved people. History is important, and we must not forget it. Thank you. So my role this evening is to provide just a little bit of anticipation and do some introduction. And I want to very briefly share some information with you about the Graduate Center with you, which I'm very happy to do, because not only do I work here, it's also my alma mater. The Graduate Center of the City University of New York, as our name implies, is a national leader in graduate education at the master's and especially the doctoral levels. As many of you know, we are the home of pioneering research and creative works, of Nobel, Guggenheim, and Pulitzer winners. We are one of the largest Ph.D. granting institutions in the country, and we are especially proud to be ranked among the country's top 10 institutions in awarding doctorates to students from underrepresented minority groups. No other graduate school in the country takes more seriously its public responsibilities or its mission to advance knowledge for the public good. The Graduate Center is not only a place dedicated to advanced education and research, it is also a proving ground of ideas, which delivers the very best research and scholarship to and far beyond the city of New York. Each year, our doctoral students teach more than 180,000 undergraduates at the City University of New York, bringing the very best research and learning from the seminar room into every neighborhood in this city. We are also an incubator of vigorous debate, reflected in our academic programs, in our scores of free public events, and across our more than 30 centers and institutes. So I invite you, if you have not done so already, to make it a habit to attend our public programs, our lectures, and our events, which will truly allow you to be at the center of conversation on pressing topics. Now tonight, we have one more set of introductions for our guests of honor that will be made by Shanta Smith-Cruz and Rodrigo Brandão, who are the co-chairs of CLAGS. Please, let's offer a round of applause for Sean and Rodrigo.
Hello, everyone. Ooh. I'm Shanta Smith-Cruz. I am an assistant professor here at the Graduate Center, head of reference at the Graduate Center Library. And I'm also one of the co-chairs of CLAGS, and I wanted to introduce you to CLAGS, which is the Center for LGBTQ Studies here at the Graduate Center. We were founded in 1991 as the first university-based research center in the United States, dedicated to the study of historical, cultural, and political issues, a vital concern of queer and trans individuals and communities. This year is our 26th year sponsoring public programs and conferences, offering fellowships to individual scholars and more.
Thank you. So again, I'm Rodrigo Brandão, also co-chair of CLAGS. We at CLAGS are able to create and increase access to free, high-quality programming on queer issues and arts, like tonight's event, because of the support from our members. They cost money. If you're not already a member, please consider an annual membership of $20 for students, fixed income, or $40 annually.
So in case you didn't hear that, membership allows this to happen. Become a CLAGS member. However, this evening's event was happily co-sponsored with multiple Graduate Center centers and institutes, and that is because it is the José Muñoz Award and requires the financial help of other centers and institutes. It was established 4 years ago by Dr. Kevin Nadal, who was the previous director of CLAGS, and the CLAGS team wanted to award the José Muñoz Award for the namesake of the scholar. Dr. Muñoz used multiple mediums, from film to text, to critique queer theory and the inclusion of communities of color as a part of the mainstream narrative. This award recognizes cultural icons that through their work serve as social activists to shed light upon and advocate for LGBTQ and LGBTQ persons of color. Previous recipients of the José Muñoz Award have included Janet Mock, José Antonio Vargas, Wilson Cruz, Frenchie Davis, and Nathan Lee Graham. So from here, we are going to enter what you've been waiting for, which is an introduction to our panelists.
It is a pleasure for me to introduce CLAGS Executive Director. Dr. Justin T. Brown is an assistant, please. Dr. Brown is an assistant professor of health sciences at LaGuardia Community College, teacher within the new Public Health Associate's degree program. He is a graduate from the Critical Social Personality Psychology doctoral program from the CUNY Graduate Center, and will receive a Master's of Public Health and Health Policy and Management in fall 2018 from the CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy. Justin's collaborative research focuses on addressing health inequities among persons of color, LGBT, youth, and those at the intersection through asset-based approaches using decolonial, community-driven, participatory action research praxis. Dr. Brown is the Evaluation Director of the Community Engaged Research Academy, former Deputy Director of the CUNY Institute for Health Equity, and is a past Program Director for Boston Gay and Lesbian Adolescent Social Services of Justice Research Institute, which is one of the only national organizations exclusively serving LGBT youth, primarily of color. In addition to his current work, Justin serves on several boards and advisory councils. His dissertation is titled Expanding Intersectionality Praxis, Informing Culturally Responsive Programming for Black and Latino Gay and Bisexual Young Men. He began his position as Executive Director of CLAGS in July 2017.
And Patrisse Cullors. Artist, organizer, scholar, and public speaker. Patrisse Cullors is a Los Angeles native and co-founder of Black Lives Matter. An online forum that builds connections between Black people and allies to fight anti-Black racism, to spark dialogue, and create connections that encourage social action. At the age of 16, Patrisse discovered herself and her passion for helping young queer women who were dealing with the challenges of poverty and being a person of color in a white American dominant country after witnessing loved ones experience hate and brutality. In 2013, Patrisse co-founded the global movement of #Black Lives Matter, which has since grown to an international organization with dozens of chapters and worldwide activists fighting anti-Black racism. She produced and directed a series of theatrical pieces titled Power, From the Mouths of the Occupied. Patrisse has been honored with various awards, including the Sydney Peace Prize Award, 2017, the Black Women of the Year Award, 2015, from the National Congress of Black Women, Civil Rights Leader for the 21st Century Award in 2015 from the Los Angeles Times, the Community Change Agent Award in 2016 from Black Girls Rock Incorporated, and the Women of the Year Award for the Justice Seekers Award 2016 from Glamour and Essence, First Ever Woke Award. Patrisse seeks to educate and empower individuals on community issues around anti-Black racism and violence to promote change for a better tomorrow. Patrisse has been featured in ABC News, The Couverture, The Los Angeles Times, Teen Vogue, The Root, MSNBC. Please welcome me, or join me in welcoming Patrisse Cullors.
Hello. Again, a little bit of this evening, and really just hoping to have really just a dialogue and conversation with you. And so as we were kind of thinking about and discussing the things for this evening, I just had kind of a few grounded questions, but I might take a few notes as we're going along to kind of come up with some follow-ups. But certainly, I want to also take this opportunity to thank you, and we are honored that you graciously accepted this award, and are so pleased and happy to have you here with us. So, to start off, thinking about your own life and your own experiences, you did come out at a fairly young age, and for that, how do you feel that has potentially had some kind of impact on kind of your work as an artist, as an organizer, as just your direction in your life?
Hey, everybody. It's really good to be here. Thanks for having me. And it's a good question. I've been gay for so long. In some ways, I think at this point now, I came out to myself and my family almost 18 years ago, and those I remember sort of the push for me actually living in my whole self and wanting to tell my family about it was really because I wanted to be honest about who I was. I wanted to be honest about my life and my life choices. And I think as a young queer person, I definitely knew that my queerness was more than about who I was attracted to. But I think in my own political development, I would learn that queerness is so much more than who we're attracted to. Queerness is how you think about how you structure things. Queerness is about challenging the norm, about challenging what's normative, for me, queerness was about challenging capitalism, challenging racism, challenging homophobia and transphobia, and in that development, building out a movement that would become, one of the first movements that became popular because of its push for intersectionality, Black Lives Matter. I think with Black Lives Matter and the growth of it, there would not be the way Black Lives Matter presents itself if it wasn't for queer women. And if it wasn't for how my queerness, my Blackness, my womanness shaped Black Lives Matter. And I think in those first few years of developing the global network, I remember meeting other women and them saying finally, other Black women in particular, queer Black women finally were being affirmed and validated. And I know what I remember what that felt like to be in Black spaces and to be told, mostly by cis Black men, heterosexual cis Black men, that we'll get to that queer stuff later. Let's focus on race right now, which really meant let's focus on Black men right now. As if Black women aren't also Black, as if Black queer people aren't Black, and that those intersections actually mean something. And I think, but also being in predominantly white queer spaces and feeling the vitriol and the racism that came out of that, and knowing that there has to be a space where these intersect because I exist. I intersect. So how do we create that? How do we develop that? And I think that's one of the reasons why Black Lives Matter is a place where you see it's an organization in a lot of ways being mostly led by young queer Black women. And I think that's incredibly important to note. In 30, 40 years from now, names that will be lifted up will be Black queer women. And I think that's incredibly powerful.
Thank you. And kind of also building off of some of what you were saying in that, in thinking about, people of color at the intersection, gay, trans, people of color in the past that have really been pivotal in making movements and establishing movements forward. How do you feel that we have been able to, through Black Lives Matter and other movements, to kind of raise the awareness and kind of ensure that this erasure no longer exists?
Well, I'll be clear that the erasure still exists, even in the height of a movement that is led by a significant amount of Black women. That's not always who gets the credit. It's not always who is seen, and that's not always whose power is being lifted up. But I think what we've created is the opportunity to have a conversation, a transparent and honest conversation around how patriarchy and homophobia and transphobia impacts our ability to grow as a movement. And I think we've seen, I've seen in the years now that I've been out to now, the types of conversations that couldn't happen or didn't happen, or when they tried to happen a decade, 15 years ago, people shut them down. And I think that's really powerful. How do we get to a place beyond conversation and into practice is really up to us. And part of that practice looks like, we talk a lot about people and their privilege, but we don't often talk about what does it concretely mean to step aside and have someone else take center stage. Part of having privilege is having power. And that's the part of the conversation that we often miss. People want to talk about privilege, but they really rarely want to talk about how they want to give up their power. And I think this is a moment where we're seeing that, right? Where we're seeing that, whether it's this person, 45, being in office, right? I won't say his name. Clinging on, really it's 45 in his entire administration, clinging on to the desperation of white cis maleness, or also happening in what we saw, thank God for Georgia voting in the right Stacey. But we saw, it was like, we can't even make this stuff up, y'all, and we're living it, we're witnessing it, but we're also seeing, the Democratic Party, who is supposed to be a party that represents us, also clinging on to this whiteness. And so the clinging on is about people clinging on to power. Because if privilege didn't also mean power, then why cling on to it? So the conversations that we should be having about how we transform, how do we actually stop erasing people's labor, is we have to have an honest conversation about who's going to step out of power so we can bring a new power in. And I'm going to be really informal. Can I have my cough drops out of my bag? Sorry, I can feel this tickle in my throat, and once it takes over, this conversation is not going to happen anymore. So they're on the side of my, like in the side pocket. Let me tell you a funny story about the MSNBC short. Have folks seen that? Are you familiar with it's like a little mini doc that they did. It came out pretty cool. It was a few years ago. And it was this MSNBC intern, and she was really trying to get the three of us, Opal and Alicia and I, to get on camera and talk about queerness in the movement. She flew all the way to Colorado, I think from New York, because we were doing Creating Change, is that big conference that happens in Colorado. And she was calling me, and this is very new for us to have sort of media asking us questions. And I don't think either of them took it as seriously as I did. And I was like, guys, she came all the way from New York. And I remember it was like maybe 11 o'clock at night, and the woman's desperate. And she's like, Patrisse, I'm still here. Can you do this video with me? And I call up Alicia and Opal, and they're like, we'll pass. So I end up doing this video with MSNBC, and I'm grateful I did it, because it was this conversation about queer folks in the movement, queer Black people in particular, and how it's either changed or what's different now. And I think, something that got synthesized for me in that video was having a really honest conversation about what it means to be a public leader, and the ways in which public leaders get lifted up and which public leaders get demonized, and really through the white gaze. This isn't anything, Black folks, we sort of understand the complexities that come with our leadership. And this person, this journalist, I don't even know how we got to the question, but she asked me about MLK, and I said, honestly, if I were, a young person in sort of this moment thinking of MLK, I would be like, oh, he's like a mythical character. I can never be like that, right? There's no way, in the way that MLK was painted as this saint, as this, And so what does it mean to have messy leaders? And what does it mean to allow our leaders to be humans and make mistakes and grow from them and develop from them? And I think in some ways, Malcolm X is such a great example for us, right? Malcolm, who tells us his story as someone who grew up in a very complicated home, a lot of complicated feelings about his own color, about his own manhood, eventually joins the Nation of Islam, in some ways feels like it saved him, and then he leaves because really Malcolm leaves the nation because he called out the Elijah Muhammad for child sexual abuse. And we witnessed this transformation that I think, what a gift he gave us, that we get to read some of his writings and listen to his speeches, and we see his arc, and we see the moments where he says, you know what, I don't actually believe what I believed 2 years ago. I believe something different now because I've evolved. And I think that's an important piece of this story, is allowing for all of our evolution, but especially the leaders who are sort of these public, visible leaders. We should be allowing for our own evolution. We should be striving for that, but we should be also modeling that.
And so following up on that, because I believe, all of us believe that you are one of those iconic cultural leaders. And in posing that own question to yourself how would you answer that for you? Who is Patrisse in this evolution of today?
I don't know. I feel like someone else could answer that better. But, you know, there's, in some ways, there's always an essence of someone that never changes, right? And if you met me when I was the 15-year-old with the shaved head and 500 piercings and, you know, cursed, and I still curse, but was incredibly, which some would say inappropriate. I think in some ways that essence of me still exists. I don't. It's the daring, it's the risky, it's the person inside of me that is like courage first, even when I'm scared. But I think in my evolution, you know, as I'm a new mom. I have a 2-year-old who's hilarious, just funny, and like my own understanding of the urgency of the now feels different than even when I was a child. I mean, every teenager thinks everything's urgent, but differently than I do now, right? Like, I'm thinking about the planet. I'm thinking of the fight for our planet. I don't think that this moment we're living in right now is a fight about America. Who cares about America? This is about a fight for our planet. And I think that is so much clearer to me from this place. And I think that's kind of how I try to orient myself in this work, that this is a planetary fight.
So I'm going to shift a little bit, not too far, and actually thinking about, with the two-year anniversary of the Pulse nightclub massacre having happened, given the endless violence and discrimination on LGBT communities of color, and in particular, trans women of color, how do you feel we can heighten and really continue to push to get this as being a key factor that needs to be addressed on some kind of national agenda and national stage? How do we actually achieve this as being a key goal?
In some ways, part of achieving that goal is raising it, continuing to raise it as part of national attention. I remember in those first few years of building out Black Lives Matter, one of the first conversations that BLM's leadership was challenged with was how are we going to talk and how are we going to work and how are we going to be in relationship to Black trans women. It was our very first conversations, and it was incredibly necessary, painful, and important that we were having those courageous conversations with each other as queer and trans people. And so I think one way we get there is not giving up on having those courageous conversations. I think another way we get there is what do we prioritize as sort of the queer and trans agenda? I'm legally married to my partner. That wouldn't have happened if we didn't have folks fighting for marriage. But this idea that marriage would then free us, which many of us, especially queer folks of color, especially Black queer folks, were challenging, right? This like idea that if we just fought for marriage, that would open up a lot of things for us. But look at what government we're living under now. And the way it's not just responding to undocumented communities and Black communities, but queer and trans communities as well. So the fight for us has to be a fight that's about not just reforming our system, but literally transforming it. And I think that that needs to be those kinds of courageous conversations that we need to be having with big LGBTQ organizations that are sitting in rooms and are having conversations about the queer and trans agenda. And oftentimes they're not talking about trans people. They're really only talking about queer people. So we need to be challenging big queer orgs. And we need to be challenging each other about how we think about this work and what feels important and what's more important. And so that it takes a type of rigor and commitment. It takes us being willing to be wrong. And it also takes folks to check their privilege and how it shows up in these spaces, and how often folks with privilege are prioritizing their own sort of set of needs. And so I think it takes work, lots of work. And
kind of building off that, I think, and just talking a little bit before, as a follow-up, I was, recently following a friend of mine who was actually discussing Boston Pride recently, and how while within midst of the parade that there were a group of activists that were there, queer community of color, really speaking to kind of the need to kind of take away how maybe in many ways this has become so, corporate, and kind of how maybe there's some, change that has happened from maybe the original kind of purpose and meaning. And so with that, during the event, she mentioned how there were a set of people that were cheering when the protesters were actually taken away. And so how can we bridge within the community and really, pushing, against that kind of agenda that seems to be coming forth?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is that we're not always going to be able to create bridges. I think that's important because it's often asked of us. So when I say us, I mean queer folks of color, trans folks of color, to be the bridge. And that to me is not the question. The question is, how do we make sure, well, let me just start with this. The first Pride was a riot. And it was a riot that was led by Black trans women and Latinx women. And if we remember that, and remind ourselves that as we're marching in our Pride parades, or deciding not to, or protesting them, then we can have a different context. So Los Angeles Pride, I don't know how much y'all are following it, is a hot mess. They actually, Pride this year, you had to pay for it. You had to pay to enter our Pride. So many of us boycotted it. Like, why would we pay for our Pride? That'll make no damn sense. So lots of folks protested it, not only because what then happens, right? When you create a situation where people have to pay for an event, a large-scale event, who ends up showing up? No, that's all true too. But which state government agencies show up? The police. So LA Pride was not just people were forced to pay for it, but by the end of Pride, it was full of riot cops. LAPD riot gear, the helicopters were out, yelling at people to disperse. So we have to be careful about what sacrifices we're willing to make in order to have Pride. And that as Pride grows, and whoever is in power or in charge of it, what we've seen time and time again is a corporatization of our Pride, a whitewashing of our Pride, And we just have to be honest about it. We have to be honest about it. And we have to be challenging the people who are more committed to whiteness than they are to the intersections of queerness.
So in addition to being an organizer, you are also an amazing artist. And so you've used it as a way to continue to fight for social justice. If you were talking to artists that may not know how to be able to do this, how to kind of create and fight through their medium of art, how would you apply the craft, and what advice would you give for them?
That's great. Not many people ask me artist questions, unless I'm like with artists. But I would say, one, it's just incredibly important to keep your practice, your art practice. And I don't think one is in exchange for the other. Although when I first entered the movement as a teenager, folks did sit me down and say, you gotta choose. You know, you're either gonna be an organizer, you're gonna be an artist. And I was like, nah, that's not how I work. And I'm grateful I didn't choose. I'm very grateful. But I think that there's so many different amazing artists. In sort of our world, it's called social practice. I'm not a big fan of that term, but I think it's an important term. It's how people are labeling themselves. It's how theorists are thinking about folks that are doing community or socially engaged art. And like any place that white supremacy exists, you know, that's who often gets privilege in the social practice conversation are white people. But there are amazing artists of color around the world who are engaging their community on a daily basis through their own practice. And I made a commitment that my work was going to center around the joy and future of Black people, as well as the current demise and destruction of Black people. And that looks like performance art, that looks like theater, that looks like doing ceremony and rituals and gatherings. And I would just encourage artists in the room to hone in on your own practice and to share it with others and think about how your practice can contribute to building out our movement or strengthening our movement.
And just a couple more. So kind of looking ahead, what do you believe are the next steps in working towards equity in society, if we can get there? And how do you think the current political climate has made an impact on our ability to continue to move forward?
Well, like I said earlier, I think this current political climate is, there's a lot of things happening. It's not just the administration in the White House. Let's remember there's lots of local politics, and for me, the local is where it's at. The local makes the national, it makes the global. So in some ways, I would just really encourage people to show up in your local context, do work at home, and be present for it. Roll your sleeves up and show up for it. But I think we're in a really also scary moment. The way in which this administration is normalizing white supremacy, that it has normalized homophobia and transphobia, and the way it's codifying it in policy, whether that's through the Voting Rights Act, whether that's through the disgusting immigration policies, or the continuous trying to ratchet up the war on drugs. I'm concerned. I'm incredibly concerned. My hope lies in our movement and our movement's ability to be resilient, but that doesn't mean that communities are coming out unscathed. And every day I feel like I'm reading something new about this horrible situation that we're in. And some days I don't feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but other days I'm reminded that this is just a blip in history. and that if we can stay committed to seeing what's on the other side, then in fact there will be a victory. But and then I also just try to like the simple victories of like being with each other and being in community and you know, seeing another person on the street and smiling, like those things are actually really important. I think there is a I feel a lot of demoralization because of this government, and I think the more we can be reminded our commitment to each other and strengthen those relationships, the more we can fight this. Oh wait, and something else. You said equity. Well, I just really want to talk about abolition. And I say the word because it's part of a legacy in this country around abolishing slavery and the hope that there'll be more of us that identify ourselves as abolitionists and abolishing the prison industrial complex. And that I think that when we're thinking about things like equity, that we have to think about that we live in a country that has a nation inside a nation, where 1.7 million people are in a jail cell or a state prison or federal prison or a county jail or detention center. And what does that mean for a country? What does that mean for this country and its history? And so when I'm thinking about social change, I'm thinking about abolition as one of my top sort of practices. And that looks like me waking up every morning and asking myself the first question, have I changed the material conditions for Black people? Has my work done that? Am I doing that? When we change the material conditions for Black people, we change the material conditions for all people.
And you know, your passion and your light is so bright for, you know, equity and system reform and making this social change for other young or old or new or people that have been in it forever. How do you keep your flame burning bright and that passion to keep moving and to not become discouraged and disheartened and just not give up?
Well, sometimes I do give up, and I feel deeply discouraged, and I'm like, all right, where are we going, family? Because this ain't it right here, as in this country, this ain't it. And then other days I'm like, okay, I'm recommitted. Like, we just got 2 more years, and then, you know, we gonna turn this ship around. It really depends on the day. I think I have grounding practices. I'm a big believer in altars. I have an altar to my ancestors. I have a spiritual practice that's rooted in African tradition, West African tradition, and I believe in community and being invested in the people around me, and so I try to have healthy relationships, and I'm a big, firm believer of therapists, if there are any therapists in the room. I think every Black person deserves a therapist. It should be part of our reparations package. I believe in alternative healing methods like somatics and acupuncture. Like, I literally do everything. I think, like, if you've been raised here, you ain't right. So you should invest in getting right, and that's what I try to do. And you know, I remember the first time I sort of had a real conversation with myself that I needed to go to therapy, and I went to my mother, I said, I want to go to therapy. I was like 21. And she said, why? You're of all my children, you're like the sanest kid. And I said, and that's exactly why I need to go to therapy. You know, for us high functioning people in the room, you know, yeah, we need support too. And so I try to invest in myself in those ways. And I think having a child has also made it feel even like more intense, because I'm like, he's watching everything. Like, and I've sort of chilled out and been like, it's okay. Like, you are watching everything, and you're gonna see me fuck up, and you're gonna see me do great things, and you're gonna see me be accountable, you know? And my father that raised me, something that I learned from him, he was the first adult in my life that was accountable. He was the first adult in my life that apologized, that asked me questions about how he could repair our relationship. And I think that, you know, I learned a lot from him about care and how to care for oneself and how to care for others.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
On behalf of the Center for LGBTQ Studies and the Graduate Center community, we would like to present Patrisse Cullors for significant contributions to LGBTQ advocacy, the José Muñoz Award for 2018.